Well, welcome
Thank you, sir. How you doing?
everyone to our program, Do You See What I See? Resources for the Blind and Visually Impaired. My name is Johanna Rodriguez Douglas. I'm the director here at the library. And I began this initiative, actually it's probably been years in the making, because I personally find the library to be too dim. The lighting here is just too dark. Come on in. And so what happened was I wrote for a grant to the American Library Association, and we got the grant. So soon we'll actually get the money, get the check. And I'm delighted about that. And hopefully the library will be a little bit brighter and have more accessibility for people. But the other component about that is that I have been reading for several years, maybe 5 or 6 years, for Valley Eye Radio in Springfield. You've heard of them? And I thought it would be really delightful as part of this initiative to have the program manager for Valley Eye, Harold Anderson, come to the library and talk about this resource, because I know about it and Jim knows about it, but that doesn't mean everybody else does. So the more that we can do, the more that we can share the word, the more we will be able to positively affect people in our community. I also have, if you would like, I have surveys here when we're finished that you can take with you home. I put them in a big font, but if that doesn't work, you can take a picture with your phone and enlarge it. We can, and if you would like to, you can, just drop it off at the library for me, because I need to know what your needs are and what your loved ones' needs are, and able to make sure that the library itself is helping, getting you the information you need and helping. So Harold has been, come on in. Harold has been the program manager at Valley Eye since 2015. He is a wonderful producer, and he has some great information to share with you. So, welcome, Harold.
Very much.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. I always like to start out by asking how many of you before this event had heard of Valley Eye Radio? Okay, actually a fair amount, which is pretty good. Because we're, like I like to say, a very well-kept secret. Valley Eye Radio actually started back in 1979, many years ago. And we were known as the Valley Radio Reading Service. The idea behind the Valley Radio Reading Service was that there was a group of people who had the idea that they could read well, but not everybody else could. And we found out that that is a very important way for people to get their information. Newspapers, magazines, such. Local newspapers especially are a very good source of information. Studies have shown very, very important. But what if you have trouble reading? What if you can't read like you used to? What if, even today, people have computers? A lot of people get information from their computers. But what are you doing on the computer? A lot of times you're reading screens. Again, same problem. What do you do? The problem comes is that if you are having difficulty reading, it can be A, quite a challenge, or B, you get cut off from a lot of information, a lot of important information, things that are going on in your community. And then someone has to tell you what's going on. Hopefully you have someone in your family or friends or something who can update you on what's going on. Not always easy. So there was a group of people, a small group of people, that decided that they wanted to do something about it. So they formed Valley Radio Reading Service. At the time, it had a lot less programming than we have now. But they wanted to at least try, get the word out. And they started, and the way that people could listen to us, I'd like to say that we are a radio station that you can't hear on the radio. And the reason I say that is because we don't have a tower. I've been asked, do we have call letters? What are our call letters? We don't have call letters. We are not a traditional radio station. So how do people access Valley Eye Radio, those who have a valid need for it? Well, traditionally, what would happen is they would get a specially tuned radio. Because although we don't have a transmitter ourselves, we piggyback off of existing radio stations, for a few in this area, WFCR 88.5, WTCC out of Springfield 90.7, and in Greenfield, WHAI 98.3. If you were to listen to any one of those radio stations on your traditional radio, what you're hearing is their main signal. What you're not able to hear are these frequencies just off of their main signal called sidebands. But the FCC allows existing commercial radio stations to give nonprofits like ourselves access to those sidebands to carry our broadcast. Well, if you can't hear it on the radio, how can you access it? What we did is we were using these specially tuned radios. Now, we call them SCA radios, and I'm not even sure myself what SCA stands for, but what it is a radio that is specifically tuned to that side frequency. So depending upon where somebody lives, they can request one of these specially tuned radios. And the question always comes up, I'll address it right now, how much does it cost? Well, it doesn't. Valley Eye Radio is a free service. Our purpose is to get the information out, to get that connection to people so that they can know what's going on in their local communities. When we give out a radio, we do request a donation of $65. But notice I stress the word request. If you know anyone in the Lions Club, and I see someone here right now, thank you very much. The Lions Clubs have raised a lot of money for us to purchase radios. And I'll tell you a true story. I was giving out radios, and I was bringing it to one gentleman one time. And I mentioned to him, as I usually do, and such about the donation and such. His response to me was, I have nothing. My response to him was, here's your radio. We will not let that be a problem to someone getting Valley Eye Radio, access Valley Radio, who has a valid need for it. Another reason why someone requests our service, true story, another true story, I was handing out a radio to someone, and they said that their prime reason for wanting it was because they had a case where there was a friend of theirs who didn't live that far away from them, who passed away. The only way they found out about it was that another friend of theirs who lives in Florida had called them up and happened to mention that this friend had passed away. So again, this sense of connection. And when you're cut off, as I mentioned that term before, you can feel a little bit isolated. I would say for all of us who have issues, for all of us who have difficulties, challenges in life, we know how that can happen. And we're going to try our best to make sure that that doesn't happen as much as we can. Now, Valley Eye Radio is one of 6 members in what's known as MAIN, M-A-I-N, the Massachusetts Audio Information Network. We cover Hamden, Franklin, and Hampshire counties. There are other members of MAIN that cover the different parts of Massachusetts. So between the 6 of us, we cover the entire state. So depending upon where someone lives, they can then request one of these specially tuned radios. Well, as we discovered over the years, and probably many of you have discovered, and I certainly discovered here when I plugged in our radio here, it is still an FM signal. FM signal, if you know anything about radio, is what they call line of sight, which means that there's a nice direct path between you and the transmitter. You've got a great reception in your house. The only problem is that the world isn't quite like that. There are things called mountains and hills and big buildings and such like that that can be between you and the transmitter site. So we can always try a radio to see if that will work for someone, but doesn't always work for some. I could show you a book that I kept where I would not jot down who had requested a radio. Check mark meant we gave him a radio, and X meant we weren't able to provide them with service. And that's a problem. So what we discovered over the last few years is we've gone into the newer technologies as well too. So now for someone who has a valid need for Valley Eye radio, and I keep stressing that because Valley Eye radio is for the visually and print impaired. Someone who's blind, someone who's visually impaired, or it could be someone who has some other kind of disability or health condition where they just can't read print material like they used to. Maybe they're using a big magnifier, or maybe they're using other adaptive equipment, which is very good, but it's still an issue. You know, when you're trying to find information online, especially the information that we provide, the local newspapers and such, a lot of times that's not available online. And even if it was, you want to get something from the Daily Hampshire Gazette, for instance, you might have a great article there. You want to go to their website, you want to navigate the channels, you want to go through it, which is great. Yeah, you can do it if you have a screen reader and you have these other kind of adaptive equipment, but that's a challenge. We have close to 100 volunteers, like Johanna and Tim, who have been reading for us for quite a number of years. We have some readers that have been reading for over 20 years or more for Valley Eye Radio. With a lot of our volunteers, I cannot say enough about our volunteers. They get it. They know what this means to them. And it's really wonderful to deal with the volunteers. I'm just saying that because you're here. I say that even when you're not here. They make this work. Because I say, if it weren't for the volunteers, there'd be no reason for me to be there. So this is what we're trying to do. So I said, what can we do for those listeners, or potential listeners, who live in a facility? A lot of our potential listeners might live in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. How do we reach them? Someone who lives in a difficult to reach area. I always remember specifically Westfield. Whenever anyone called up looking for service for someone who lived in Westfield, I immediately went into my "what are we going to try if this doesn't work" speech. Because I just knew the radio reception in Westfield was terrible. So we've got a few other possibilities now. For those of you who have a valid need for our service, smart speakers have come out in the last several years. Amazon Echo, Google Home, such like that. Very convenient, especially for someone who lives alone or has difficulty seeing print material. Gets a lot of information that way. It's also a way of accessing Valley Eye Radio. Website. We just upgraded our website a few years back. Prior to that, I would always say to people, I said, have you seen our website? And if they said yes, I would say, I feel very sorry for you. It was one page. I don't know when it was originally made, but anyway. So now we have a modern website. It is fully accessible. Screen readers and such like that, accessible. It has a lot of information about Valley Eye Radio. It has our programming schedule. I handed that out to a number of you already, as far as what our current programming schedule is. It also has articles from newspapers that are written about us. It has various ways that someone can listen to Valley Eye Radio, and just a lot of information. Someone can, if you know of someone that would like to be a volunteer reader for us, I'll get into that as far as how that goes, but you can sign up there as well too, or even request a radio for someone. That's also a possibility as well too. Okay, so we've got the radios as one option. We've got the smart speakers as another option, and the website as another option. An additional option that has happened in the last few years is that there are some cable access stations in our service area that have agreed to carry Valley Eye Radio, at least to a certain extent. So one of them is Westfield. I mentioned that as a possibility. So as soon as that happened from Westfield, I got on the phone with those people that had asked for service in Westfield, and I said, guess what? You can now listen to Valley Eye Radio. So we're very happy with that. We're always looking into other possibilities as far as what we can do. So, what do we do? What do we read? If you have a chance to look over that programming schedule, we broadcast 24/7, 365. We were there on many of the holidays, not some of the major ones, but we're still there, giving the information because we feel that it's important. As a general rule, we read all the major newspapers: Springfield Republican, Westfield News, Daily Hampshire Gazette, Greenfield Recorder, every day that they're published. And for every publication that we read, because we also read the community newspapers, brought in an old copy of the Reminder, Easthampton, Southampton, Westhampton, local news. Springfield Republican, of course, we read this morning live. A lot of different possibilities. But I mentioned about all of that programming that we have. Just to go over some of it, if you know of anyone with a visual or print disability who is a veteran, or a retired veteran, every afternoon at 2:30, we have a volunteer reader who is a retired, I believe, Marine Corps veteran, who reads VA News, reads military.com, various other articles to update veterans on what's going on. It's very important. On Saturdays, we also read from the Social Security blog. Like we put update as to what's going on with the Social Security Department. That's something that's very important for a lot of people. We even read the grocery ads. Big Y and Stop and Shop. Not everything, of course. Can't do that. Which reminds me of another question that people tend to ask. Can you read everything in the newspaper? No. Although it's getting easier. I'll say the newspapers get a little bit thinner, getting a little bit easier. Remember one day I was filling in for a reader of the Springfield Republican, and it happened to be a very slow news day, I guess, and I literally, except for maybe the classifieds and the comics or something, I pretty much read the entire newspaper, but normally speaking, we can't. So we do have to prioritize. Now, you heard me mention about local news and our importance of getting people local news in connection with what's going on in their local communities. So as a general rule, when we go over a newspaper, they pretty much all tend to follow the same pattern. Any newspaper tends to feel that their front page is where they put their most prominent articles. So you're reading the front page articles. Then you're working through the publication. This is what I tell our volunteers. You're working through the publication with a focus on the more prominent local news. And what I mean by that is obviously if they change your tax rate or they change your sewer fees, that's a little bit more prominent than perhaps someone getting an advancement to vice president at a local bank, for instance. So I go through the local news, and then if there's still time in the publication, they can then fill in with the state news, national news, and so forth. Most programs that we have run a half an hour in length. Although the major newspapers are much longer than that, most of them tend to be a half an hour in length. Now, as for every publication that we read, there is one feature which tends to be probably more requested than any other feature from an eligible listener. Any guesses as to what that feature would be?
The obituaries.
Obituaries. Absolutely. As a general rule, people who get conditions, visual conditions, other disabilities, tend to do so later in life. And as a general rule, as we all get older, it becomes a little bit more interesting for us to know if our friends are still around. Now, some obituaries can be rather long, rather wordy. So no, we do not read the entire obituary. We just want to give enough information so that someone listening can know, do I know this person, do I not know this person? And if so, who do I contact, or when is the service, if there is one? The basic kind of information on that. So very important. It's probably the most commonly requested feature that we have. But it's not all news. Try to have a little bit of fun as well too. On the weekends and such, we have a program called Pet Corner, Saturday at 3 o'clock.
That's me.
Gee, I wonder who I know about that. We have a self-professed dog lover who reads from Dogster magazine, and a self-professed cat lover who reads from Catster magazine. And so we do that as well too. We also read from the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, Sports Illustrated, Women's World, some health news, and some of the more, what they call the feel-good stories, where someone talks about someone who really helped them, or an angel in their life, or something of that sort. Really nice stuff like that. I say for Women's World, no, we do not read the article about how somebody lost 80 pounds in 2 days. No. We stick to basically the natural health information and the good news.
Who chooses the articles, the reader or?
The reader, the volunteer reader is the one who chooses the articles based upon the guidelines that I mentioned. So we do give them some guidance as far as, these are the articles that we want you to read. So they come through with that. Scams are a big issue. People get conned in various ways. There's a local attorney out of Amherst, attorney Stephen Weissman. We interviewed him one time on that. He has a blog, an online blog called Scamicide, scamicide.com if you ever want to check it out. It's free. And every day he gives a report on a various scam to let people know about things. There was another healthcare breach I just printed up today for someone. I guess Harvard Pilgrim or something just reported that they have it. So if any of you are connected with Harvard Pilgrim or something like that, you can give some advice and tips on what you can do about that. But that's just one example. So just about every day we read from that blog as well too. New York Times, Boston Globe, we get that from one of the other members of Maine who does the recording, so we share sometimes programming between us on that. But our focus is, as I said, information. We don't get into a lot of national news. We don't get into a lot of national politics. We feel that a lot of eligible listeners, they have access to cable, and you get lots of that stuff on cable television. Again, we're not trying to give somebody something that they can get themselves. We give them something that they normally can't access themselves. So do we read books? No. We do not read books, again, for the same reason, because a lot of people who have reading difficulties, you have ebooks, you have Perkins, you have various other sources you can get books, and you choose the book that you want to listen to instead of us choosing the book for you and choosing the schedule by which you hear it. So that just didn't make any sense, so again, we're sticking to that local news. Yes?
Do you have any idea of how many listen? Can you get that?
Unfortunately, that's very limited information that we can get. I know that in the last 7 or 8 years that I've been doing it, I've been handing out probably about 70 to 80 radios. But we can get some data from how many people might be listening on Alexa or how many people might be listening on that, but it's really not that much information that we'd like. We'd like to get feedback from people, and a lot of times it's also getting the word out to people. Organizations and such like that. So also for any of you, your church group, organization you belong to, and such like that, as you tell, we do presentations. So if your group would like to have a presentation from Valley Eye Radio, let us know. And we'd be glad to come to your organization and give that kind of a presentation on that. So we're trying to get the word out because a lot of times we don't have an ad budget. We don't have ability to do that. We're working on some other marketing aspects right now. We're putting together a special postcard that we're going to be able to send out. I'd like to send that out to ophthalmologists and such like that, let them know as well too. I sent out to various faith-based groups to let them know maybe they can print it in their bulletin or their newsletter they hand out to their congregation. It's also a good way of doing it. Every quarter we come out with our news brief. I handed out a copy, at least as many of that I had about that, which is little updates as far as what Valley Eye Radio is up to. Facebook, Instagram, our pages are there as well too, so you can check that as well and see how that is going on. Another highlight is Wednesday. Wednesday afternoon tends to be what I call our health block. So after the morning programs where we have the major newspapers, we have, for instance, the health news from the New York Times. Staring at somebody here. We have the health news again from Women's World. We have a health event program. We have some event programs as well too, because again, one of the problems that people we feel with disabilities have is getting around. Always dependent upon someone to bring them to some place or such like that. So we try to get information, recordings from various events. A lot of things that have happened with Zoom and such like that. And they can send us a copy of the audio on that, and then we will rebroadcast that for our listeners. We have a great relationship, for instance, with Bay State Health. They just started a new 3-part series, if you know anyone with Parkinson's disease. They just started a series on Parkinson's disease with one of their physicians. And they just sent it to us, the copy of part 1, and that aired, in fact, I think it's airing right now, if I'm not mistaken, at 3 o'clock. So our listeners are getting that information if they're not able to navigate the website or find it in another fashion. I mentioned about the programming and such, how it's improved over the last few years. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell a little bit of a story here because you've heard about something called COVID, something like that.
Changed our world.
It comes up in the news every once in a while, I don't know, something like that. Just prior to that, COVID, as you know, was declared a pandemic back in March of 2020. Just prior to that, we had a bit of an issue. We're limited in space, like 2 recording studios, or 2 areas you can record. So it was literally, where we were at the time, we moved since then, but we were at the time, it was literally, you'd be reading, you'd be waiting outside. When you were done, you would be going in, then you'd be waiting outside. And it's like, in order to get more programming, we gotta have more ways of doing this. So we were looking for ways of having remote reading. Someone that could read outside of the studio. So we're already started in that. And at the time, again, our programming was very limited. Daily Hampshire Gazette was only a few times a week. Greenfield Recorder was only once a week. And I kept telling my executive director, if I had more volunteers, we could get more programming. If I had more volunteers, we could get more programming. Well, you know the old expression, be careful of what you ask for. So she said, okay, why don't you put out a press release? So we send a press release to all the newspapers in our service area that we do let people know we're looking for volunteers. The response was unbelievable. We went from about 47 volunteers up to about 94 because of that ad. And that all happened, by the way, January, February 2020. Thank God, just before COVID hit. Once COVID hit, we were considered an essential service, so we were still able to be there, but our volunteers, for very obvious reasons, decided not to come to the studio anymore. So it was just myself and the executive director. But because we've been working on this, because a lot of our new volunteers were already in the mindset of recording remotely, we not only continued our programming, that was when we expanded our programming to what we have today, which we're very, very proud of, as far as what we're able to provide for people. I mentioned as far as the volunteers, we have volunteers ranging the whole spectrum, from people who have very little technical expertise all the way to some people who do. God bless them. I'm not one of them. I'm low tech and proud of it. And also, we do not have very many what I would consider quote unquote professional readers. I like to say we're real people speaking with real people. And that is our big selling point. People who have visual disabilities, print disabilities, they hear enough of those computer-generated voices. We have volunteers reading for volunteers. So some people come to our studios, other people read from their own home, using their own computer. The software is free, something called Audacity. Just get an inexpensive microphone, plug it into your computer, do your recording, send a link in your email, send it to me, I download it, process it, we get it on the air. So it can work either way. You got a
I
question?
just wondered if I know a few of your readers, and I wondered if you let them go off script. Like, do they get to tell jokes, etc.?
Who would do that?
Just to keep it light. Keep it light.
Yes, I mean, we want people to be themselves. So they introduce themselves at the beginning of recording. They give a little close at the end. Some people have their own little catchphrase or something they use at the end. That's fine. You're reading a story that we're real people. You're reading a story about someone whose child got killed in a car accident. We're human too. They say, wow, that's really tough, or such like that. Or there's a story about something happening at a local park, and you might say, oh yeah, I remember being at that park or something. That's a really nice park, and I know they've improved it the last few years. Something like that is fine. What we don't want is editorializing. I can't believe the mayor did that. That is such a dumb idea. I can't believe what. Okay, it may be a dumb idea, I don't know, but we'll let the person listening make up their own mind on that subject. So not editorializing, but to a certain extent, being personable is fine. Because another thing is that someone who has especially visual difficulties, a lot of the information comes from their hearing. So when they tune in to Valley Eye Radio, they are listening to our program. They're hearing the real person, and they're relating to this person through their hearing. So that personal aspect of it or something is fine. But generally speaking or something like that is just, we're providing the information in that fashion. So if that answers your question.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
If I can just interject,
Yeah.
Joan, one of the things that I always keep in mind when I'm reading is that this isn't about me. So jokes are about me. Reading the information and getting it out to those who need it, that's about them. So that's I follow what Harold's saying, and that is that I keep it to the information, even though I put myself into it, I keep it to them, not me.
Exactly. So some of our programming has adjusted because of some feedback, and we don't get nearly as much as I would like, but we started doing a lot more with local history. When I was delivering a radio to someone and they mentioned they had an interest in local history, and I said, yeah, it makes sense, Again, especially as we get older, something from your past, and maybe from your community would be good. We were doing one program, we did more of it before COVID. We'd like to start it up again at some point. And it was an idea that came from talking to a potential listener who said they were a senior. And they said, we seniors like to tell stories. We like to giggle, was how she phrased it. I said, what a great idea for a program. So what we did is we went to various senior centers, organizations, and we would do recordings. We'd set up a theme. We did my first job, what I did on summer vacation. West Springfield wanted to do the Big E, of course. And I basically just have a conversation with someone. We recorded it, put it together in a program we called I Remember When. So that was kind of fun. And see, there's other things, read from AARP Magazine, Reader's Digest, Discover Magazine, Science, History, Business, that kind of, again, information to try to keep people informed as to what's going on. Yes.
Harold, I wondered if this, since you've been speaking beautifully for over a half hour, I wondered if we wanted to open the floor
Sure.
at this point to any questions. And I just wanted to also express my admiration and real appreciation for those Lions Club members who are here. They do an amazing service. We have the box out here for used eyeglasses, and there was somebody who would come over before COVID all the time and pick up those glasses. And then recently they fixed my video eye machine in the back of the library, which we can, having to do with historical resources, genealogy work, anybody who wants to look at that difficult handwriting, the video eye machine is really great. And I know a lot of us, even those of us who have visual problems, really could use that assistance. Anyway, I just wanted to open the floor to any questions.
Any questions about Joliet Radio or programming? Okay.
Everybody knows exactly what Harold said.
Well, I know, I've just heard from a few people I know, like Tim, he has a certain time. Is it once or twice a week you read?
I read on Monday mornings, the Monday Gazette.
The Monday Gazette. So do you get that through your email, or do you have to pick it up? or-
We have a subscription, electronic subscription,
Yeah.
so I read it on my computer. And, you know, Harold's talking about Audacity. So I'm fortunate that I have a home computer that's got a big enough screen for those who are thinking about being a volunteer, that I'm able to put the newspaper on the left side and Audacity on the right, so I can read and watch. And then every time I screw up, I can stop it, erase it, and re-record it.
Your friend the pause button. Yeah, and I do editing, programming before we put it on the air. Try to clean things up and such like that. There's always some technical thing that needs to be done. We have one part-time programming assistant, Diane, who's been very, very helpful. That's basically it, other than the volunteers, as far as putting the programming on the air.
So it's usually the radio, or can you get on the computer now?
Get it on the computer. There's a way of getting it through the website. Again, I just, again, have to stress the fact that our service is only for those who are visually or print impaired. So if someone does have that kind of disability, just give us a call. I'd be glad to go over with someone, try to come up with the best way of getting them the proper service and such. And obviously, in fact, we know about you, we can also keep in contact with you.
I also wanted to share that just because the library has audiobooks that you can listen to and the Libby app that you can download and use those things for your listening, what is special about this service is this whole idea, as Harold said, about staying connected with your community, finding out, hey, what is the town budget? How did we vote in that last town meeting? How much are they spending on the new pumper truck? All of these things that if you don't have this kind of resource, you're not going to find out about it unless somebody tells you. And who wants to be dependent on other people telling you? So,
The more that we can provide someone a sense of independence or recapturing a bit of the independence that they used to have beforehand, that is a great feeling. Where somebody can be able to do it for themselves. I had one person who mentioned about that they really liked the fact that they could do it now for themselves through our service. So we're very, very grateful for our volunteers, for our supporters, for everyone who has helped us out throughout the years. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned the Alexa or whatever you have there. So does the person need to have the internet and Wi-Fi or something to use that?
To use the smart speakers, yes, you
Need
need
to be-
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi?
And I know with Alexa that someone has to have an Amazon.com account. So that's not something that I can set up for them. but a family member could come in and using their own Amazon account, set up a unit for them. And that, we also try to get into some facilities. I know Glen Meadow in Long Meadow has a channel which is devoted to Valley Eye Radio. So we're looking into that as far as a possibility as well too.
Yeah, Easthampton Media, we stream Valley Eye Radio on channel 193 in Easthampton and channel 191 in Southampton. We stream on Monday and Wednesdays. We have Valley Eye Radio playing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any
Yeah.
other
Any
questions from the floor? I bet Harold is gonna have a bunch of people jump up and talk to him.
Now, if you need our service, have a need for our service, let me know. If you know of someone who has a need for our service, please let them know. If you or someone you know would be interested in being a volunteer, please let us know that as well too. Because again, as far as the wide spectrum, we have volunteers that do just an article every once in a while, all the way up to full programs, all the way up to some readers actually do multiple programs. So I mentioned about the programs being half an hour, but not every program runs the full half hour. So sometimes those little individual articles can help. I can throw them in on occasion. Get some interesting articles. We like getting that information out. Yes.
If I could make an observation, obviously I'm biased because I'm a reader, and I've been listening to books on some kind of tape, cassette, CD, et cetera, since I was a road salesman way back in the early 90s. And but one of the things I do that everybody can do, and that is, and I drive, some of you know, I drive the bus for the senior center, and I also do it in West Springfield and Hadley every once in a while as they need it. But I've learned that every time I see someone, if I get an indication that they're visually impaired in some way or manner, that they can't read, I ask them, you ever heard of Valley Eye Radio? And it's amazing how many say no. And then I talk to them about, hey, would you like to use this service? So it's so easy just to connect and say, is this something that you could use?
Yeah.
It's free, and I think you'd really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And you know, when my father, near the end of his life, I was speaking to a patient about this yesterday. If he wanted to read, the VA gave him this little red box, and he had to like load things in this red box that would decrease, I guess, the white light, the glare. And it was cumbersome, and this would have been a much more peaceful way for him to get the New York Times.
I can tell you one of the saddest things that I've dealt with over the last number of years that I've been with Valley Eye Radio is when I meet someone and, oh, what are you doing? So I talk about Valley Eye Radio, and I come up with, oh, if only I had known my mother, my cousin, my friend, my neighbor, whatever, would have loved this. So, with your help, hopefully we can get the word out to those that have a need for our service.
And Harold, how should people contact you? Is that information on the programming list here?
The information is on the flyer sheet that I handed out. Unfortunately, I didn't bring a lot of business cards, but there's a phone number here. And also, online is valleyeyeradio.org. I is EYE, of course. You can see. Phone number is here, 413-747-7337. So you can send me a message online. You can call. However you want to get in contact with us.
And how often do you change the schedule, or does it stay about the same?
It stays about the same. You'll see on the schedule there's some things that are fairly general, like it'll say local program. That basically means whatever it is I have to play that I want to put in that time. Otherwise it's fairly set. Or it might say an event program will be here, so obviously that will change from time to time. Sometimes changes are made. That's why on the website, I keep up the website so that way it has the latest information on that. We've got this great program that we got from MAVV, which is the Mass Association of the Blind Visually Impaired. that one of their directors did a few years back, but it's still relevant, called Dangerous Vision. And he did a series of interviews with people from the vision impaired community. Some very prominent people, a lot of great stories to tell, and we now air that on Saturdays at 3:30 in the afternoon. So there are some changes that can happen on that. And I'm looking into different ways of how we can update that. More so, especially for listeners, so they can be aware of what's going on.
And like, so my father-in-law, I think, still has his, so he's in Springfield, you got people in Northampton, do they get the same station?
Yeah, yeah. Right now, currently, this brings up another point, currently we do not have podcasting. We were working on that as an option. Podcasting is where someone goes on the website and they download a program so they can listen to it whenever they want to listen to it. But we do rebroadcast things, so for instance, someone wanted to listen to the Daily Hampshire Gazette. You know, Tim's reading it at 11 o'clock on Monday, but it's also rebroadcast at 9 o'clock that evening. So if someone misses it in the morning, they can always catch it in the evening. It's also broadcast overnight as well too. Because I have heard from a couple of readers and such like that. You wake up and what are you going to do? So you turn on the radio and listen to Valley Eye Radio. Hear some friendly voices, which is really nice. So,
Well,
thank
if-
you very
if
much.